February 1st, 2025. A 25% U.S. tariff on Canadian wheat triggers a chain reaction. By August, those tariffs hit 35%, and Canada retaliates with tariffs on $21 billion of U.S. goods. But what most people missed was this. Canadian Western Red Spring wheat is not just another crop. It is the protein backbone behind U.S. bread and flour, and replacing it is not possible overnight. The Supreme Court's split decision and Mark Carney's pivot to Mexico and Asia only deepened the rupture. Bread prices rose, even as global wheat got cheaper, exposing just how fragile integrated supply chains can be. How did a routine policy tool transform your grocery bill? And what does this reveal about leverage in everything from cars to batteries? On November 25th, 2024, a late-night social media post from President Trump set the first domino in motion. He pledged to impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, citing border security and fentanyl concerns. Within weeks, the White House invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, giving the president authority to regulate commerce during a declared emergency. On February 1st, 2025, an executive order landed, imposing 25% tariffs on most Canadian imports, with energy products at 10%. The order referenced the broad emergency powers in IEEPA, bypassing Congress and triggering immediate legal debate. Canadian officials responded in kind. By March 4th, 2025, Canada issued its own United States surtax order, slapping 25% retaliatory tariffs on $21 billion in American goods, from steel to agricultural machinery. The tit-for-tat escalated. In August, the U.S. raised tariffs on Canadian goods to 35%, as new executive orders and memoranda layered on top of each other. Meanwhile, legal challenges mounted. On February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court delivered a split decision, and the original tariffs based on IEEPA were found invalid. But the White House did not back down. 4 days later, a fresh proclamation cited Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, shifting legal authority and reimposing tariffs under a new framework. As one trade lawyer explained, this pivot from emergency powers to statutory tariffs was more than a technical fix. It reset the rules of engagement, keeping the pressure on supply chains and setting up the next round of confrontation. Canadian Western Red Spring Wheat, or CWRS, is not just another grain on the commodity charts. It is the backbone of North American premium bread flour, prized for its high protein, averaging 13.5%. For comparison, U.S. hard. Red winter wheat hovers between 10.5 and 14%, while soft red winter rarely tops 10.5%. That extra protein is not academic. It translates to stronger gluten, better dough elasticity, and the volume that industrial bakeries demand for sandwich loaves and bagels. Inside a Midwestern milling plant, the calibration is precise. A veteran miller runs two doughs side by side, one with CWRS, one with domestic wheat. The difference is clear. The CWRS dough stretches, traps air, and bakes into a loaf with the structure supermarkets expect. Without it, the loaf falls flat and formulas fail. That is why U.S. mills import nearly 90% of their spring wheat from Canada, about 1.3 million metric tons a year, valued at $784 million in 2024. This dependency is not just about bread on American shelves. Canada's prairies, mostly Saskatchewan and Manitoba, specialize in CWRS, shipping 4.5 million tons south annually. And it is not just a U.S. story. Over 676,000 tons of Canadian wheat flow to Mexico too, a trade worth $258 million last year. Replacing CWRS is not a matter of flipping a switch. Agronomists estimate a multi-year lag, 2, 3, even 5 years, to breed, plant, and scale up domestic alternatives with comparable protein and gluten. Meanwhile, U.S. mills and bakeries are locked into recipes and contracts built around Canadian supply. The operational risk here runs deeper than any tariff or legal skirmish. It is a structural lock-in, with no quick substitute waiting in the wings. Mark Carney stepped into the Prime Minister's office at a moment when Canada's trade future looked anything but certain. Instead of waiting for the next round of United States tariffs, Carney's government launched a deliberate campaign to reduce Canada's exposure to American markets. By the spring of 2026, Canadian wheat was flowing to 62 countries, up from just over 40 before the tariff war began. Rail lines that once moved grain south to Minneapolis and Chicago now extended west to Vancouver and Prince Rupert, loading ships bound for Mexico, Japan, and China. In January, Carney's trade team signed a multi-year grain corridor deal with Beijing, opening direct routes for prairie wheat and canola. Mexican millers, facing their own supply worries, inked contracts for more than 400,000 tons of Canadian wheat, shifting long-standing United States market share. At the same time, Ottawa expanded its agri-marketing program by $75 million, funding new trade offices from Manila to Jakarta. Carney's message was clear: Canada would not be boxed in by a single buyer, no matter how large. For United States exporters, the warning was implicit. Canada's pivot threatened to turn a temporary tariff fight into a permanent realignment of North American agriculture. Pressure built quickly on Capitol Hill as the impact of the wheat tariffs rippled through farm states and corporate boardrooms alike. On February 26, the House of Representatives took up a bipartisan resolution to repeal the latest round of tariffs. The final tally, 219 to 211, reflected a rare coalition of Democrats and Republicans from wheat-producing regions, alarmed by mounting calls from millers, bakers, and farm groups whose livelihoods depended on cross-border grain flows. Lawmakers from Kansas, North Dakota, and Minnesota spoke out, warning that lost access to Canadian wheat threatened not just local farms, but the entire food supply chain. Behind closed doors, lobbyists from the National Association of Wheat Growers and the American Bakers Association argued that the tariffs were already raising ingredient costs, with no easy substitutes in sight. Meanwhile, industry leaders raised another concern. As Canada expanded exports to Asia and Mexico, United States farmers risked losing market share for years to come. The narrow House vote signaled real limits to how far tariff policy could go before it collided with domestic economic interests. Even as the White House pressed ahead, the political ceiling was becoming impossible to ignore. Ottawa's diversification push wasn't left to market forces. In February 2026, the government expanded the agri-marketing program by $75 million, targeting new export markets for wheat, canola, and pulses. This injection funded a network of trade offices, including a flagship branch in Manila, opened in 2024, to anchor Canadian presence in Southeast Asia. Trade officials, drawing up blueprints in glass-walled meeting rooms, mapped out direct links between prairie elevators and Asian flour mills. The Manila office became a hub for connecting Canadian grain growers with buyers from the Philippines, Indonesia, and beyond, markets that had once been afterthoughts in Ottawa's export strategy. Agri-marketing grants covered everything from technical workshops on Canadian wheat quality to digital campaigns aimed at Asian bakers and food companies. These were not stopgap measures. By formalizing new corridors and relationships, Canadian policy locked in a recalibration of agricultural trade. With each new contract signed and every trade mission launched, the old dependence on a single customer faded, replaced by a web of diversified supply routes designed to outlast the current tariff cycle. General Mills cut its earnings forecast for 2026, citing wheat costs that kept climbing even as global prices fell. Chief Financial Officer Kofi Bruce explained that tariff-driven inflation was overwhelming any relief from lower commodity markets, with the company's hedges pushing the pain into next year. Flour prices had dropped 10.3% in Canada before the tariff war, but in the United States, new import duties sent costs in the opposite direction. Economists ran the numbers. For a typical American household, the cumulative impact of wheat and flour tariffs added up to nearly $1,500 a year, an invisible tax flowing from the mill to the grocery aisle. This wasn't just a corporate problem. Every bakery, every sandwich shop, every loaf of bread now carried the cost of a policy fight, passed straight to the consumer. Supply chain planners have seen this pattern before. Wheat is only the latest in a growing list of strategic resources that quietly anchor North American industry: potash for fertilizers, aluminum for cars, hydroelectric power for factories, crude oil, and the rare minerals that power electric vehicles. The same logic that binds U.S. bakeries to Canadian wheat also ties automakers to cross-border flows of steel, batteries, and critical minerals. When tariffs hit, the ripple is never limited to a single product. Instead, planners scramble to reroute shipments, recalibrate recipes, or secure backup suppliers, often at higher cost and lower reliability. The wheat war is a warning. What happens in bread today can happen in batteries, engines, or even the electricity grid tomorrow. Three policy roads now stand before North America: deeper integration, radical diversification, or a fragile middle ground. Each path reshapes not just the price of bread, but the very structure of trade, jobs, and security. So the questions remain: should North America commit to tighter integration or hedge with diversification? And if wheat can trigger such upheaval, what happens when the next strategic supply chain is tested? Right now, a 35% tariff on Canadian wheat is reshaping every grocery bill and boardroom strategy across the continent. As North America weighs integration versus diversification, the real question emerges: if bread sparks this much disruption, what happens when electric vehicles or critical minerals come next? Drop your thoughts below.